Hey everyone, Zach Perry here. Thanks for visiting my channel. Thanks for taking time out of your day to hear what I have to say. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about the greatest tax vehicle ever invented. Now I've talked about this before. It's the investment grade insurance contract. It allows you to grow your money tax-free, and it provides a tax-free retirement and a tax-free death benefit to your heirs. There's no other place where you can stick $1 in, retire with multiple dollars, and then have multiple dollars go to your heirs tax-free. And there are guarantees associated with this, right? So you're not worried about the risk of the stock market, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I've extolled the virtues of the investment-grade insurance contract, or IGIC, many, many times in these videos and live presentations in the firm channel, et cetera. But one question I get very often is, what happens if Congress gets together and they decide they're going to change the rules on this insurance product? What happens? And the greatest and latest, or the late and greatest, the last and greatest tax vehicle is gone. What happens? Well, I'm going to refer to a chapter in my book because I did some extensive research on this, and I wanted to figure out, number one, I mean, we have to acknowledge that's possible. Congress can change the rules, right? They change the tax rules all the time. Now, they change the rules on qualified plans all the time. They change the tax brackets. They change tax incentive, deductions, et cetera, right? All the time. Now, one thing that has remained relatively intact is the insurance contract. In fact, the tax code didn't even address it until 1986. And in 1986, Ronald Reagan was at the helm, and we saw some of the most sweeping tax cuts in history. But they had to make up for the lost revenue and taxes somewhere. And one thing they were discussing in 1986 is this insurance contract, because people were stuffing huge sums of money into a cash value driven life insurance contract. So you could get drug lords or people with illegitimate businesses where they could almost use it to launder money, where they were sticking millions of dollars in these insurance products. And not only were there asset protection parts to it, so once that money was in there, it couldn't be taken from them, but it came with a huge death benefit and tax advantages. So they could use a legitimate product in an illegitimate way. And Congress saw that as an abuse, and they're like, no, this isn't okay. But they did not want, they wanted to do away with this without sacrificing the legitimate tax protections afforded by a life insurance contract. So that's when they created what's called a modified endowment contract, and for the first time they defined insurance contract. And they basically said, look, if you want the tax protections and asset protections afforded by an insurance product, it's actually got to be an insurance product. And so we're not going to have any more of this. You stuff a ton of money in, and you get a little bitty bit of death benefit, and you call it life insurance. So they came up with this formula. It's called the Mech Formula. It's a 7-pay test. There are actually 2 different tests in the statute. And they said, look, if you're going to want the protections afforded by the insurance contract, it's got to have the relationship between the cash value and the death benefit has got to be such. There's got to be so much death benefit, or it's just not, it's not an insurance policy. And if it's not an insurance policy, that's okay. You can still stick your money in it, but we're not going to call it an insurance policy, and you're not going to get the same tax benefits. So that was 1986 when that became effective, okay? Since then, that statute, which is 26 U.S.C. 7702, that has been unaltered until just recently. Now in 2020, at the end of 2020, Congress, in another relief package, they slipped a change into 7702, which is beyond the scope of this video. It was only changed a little bit. It was changed so that you could actually put more cash in for less death benefit. And the interest rate that insurance companies are required to pay is no longer fixed at the 1980s rate. It is now flexible. Okay, so those are the 2 major changes. But other than that, it remained untouched. But there was a discussion in the 1985 session of Congress leading up to this 1986 tax change, where they talked about, for example, should we start taxing loans taken out against a policy? Now, that's one of the greatest aspects of these insurance products, is that the money can grow, and at the same time you can borrow against it and use it to pay off debt, to invest tax-free, all sorts of different ways that you can use the insurance, the cash value of it. Now, so there were a number of proposed changes due to pressure from the Treasury Department because there was going to be a huge shortfall in tax revenue with these tax cuts. So the Treasury Department was like, hey, we need to make this up somewhere. And so this was, they're like, we've got all this money in insurance. Can we tap into that? So this all leads me back to my original question. What happens if at one point they choose to change this one great, the last great tax product? And so I went through the congressional record of 1985. It's available online. The link is quite long, but it's in the last chapter of my book if you're interested in reading it for yourself. I know none of you are. That's okay. I went through it. I pulled out some of the best parts. But I went through and I wanted to see what were the different senators and House of Representatives, representatives, what were the members of Congress saying on both sides of the aisle? What was their position? Now, what you'll see in this book, and I know you're not going to be able to read this, but I want to give you some idea. I just took pages and pages of the different senators and House members, their statements on their positions. And these were people on both sides of the aisle. This is not a partisan issue. I mean, we've got Illinois, Oklahoma, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Texas, Tennessee, Nebraska, Utah, Louisiana, Oregon, New Hampshire. I mean, people from all over the place. And I just put their statements in here and what their opinion was on what, whether they were ever willing to vote on stripping the insurance of these tax protections. And the answer was resoundingly no. Now, interestingly, the little anecdote here. So my editor, when they're looking through this, my editor was like, you've got a lot of quotes here. This just seems like a lot. Do we really need all this in here? Or can we just pick 2 or 3 and cut back? And I told my editor, said, no, this is important. This is a big issue. People want to know that this is safe and it's not going anywhere. And so I insisted, we got to include all this in here. And I left it in here. You don't necessarily, if you get the book, you're not necessarily going to read all of it, but you may want to, or might be a good reference for you. But I'll just give you a couple tidbits, some of the shorter ones. So Senator Alphonse D'Amato from New York, I assure you that I will be watching carefully to see if the provisions impacting life insurance are removed. In other words, you can't touch life insurance. I'm not willing to do it. I'm just picking some of the shorter ones. Bud Schuster from Pennsylvania, taxing the annual increased value of life insurance is tantamount to taxing the interest on certificates of deposit, although the interest is not received until the certificate matures. So he's not going to do it. Texas, Treasury's current proposal would treat the owners of life insurance as having actually received the cash value which has accumulated during the past year and therefore tax this value as income even though the policyholder access to cash value is generally in the form of a loan, which they must repay with interest. Not going to do it. Tennessee, I promise to oppose legislation which unfairly singles out one segment of our society. For this reason, I'm against the proposed taxation of inside buildup of permanent life insurance policies. Nebraska, many have written to me opposing the taxes that in effect would be imposed on the cash buildup of life insurance. Let me assure that I oppose these changes in the law. New Hampshire, I would not support that taxation of the inside buildup on insurance policies. New Jersey, the increase in the cash value of life insurance policies could increase the taxable income of many families and discourage investment in essential life insurance protection. I mean, and this goes on and on and on. So Congress was resoundingly opposed to touching life insurance and changing its tax preferred status. Now I know times have changed since then, but they're still overwhelmingly in support of it. And why is that? I suspect it's because that's exactly where they have their money. Now, if that's not, doesn't give you the warm fuzzies enough, okay, how about this? I do a legal analysis. I put my attorney hat on and I do a legal analysis. Let's suppose, number one, that a state wanted to strip life insurance of its protections. States are their own sovereigns and they are authorized to pass their own statutes. For example, the asset protection status of the cash value of life insurance varies state to state. Well, let's say that states wanted to say, you know what, taxation, we want to treat it a little bit differently in our state. Well, there's something called the Supremacy Clause in the U.S. Constitution, and basically it says if the federal government has passed a law on a certain subject, the states cannot contradict it. Well, the federal government has issued taxation laws on life insurance, and therefore states cannot contradict it. So that's one protection. There's also something called the Contracts Clause. Now, if you want further details, again, last chapter of my book before the conclusion. But basically, the contracts clause from the Constitution says no state shall pass any law impairing the obligation of contracts. Now, I'm not going to get into specifics. You can get those from the books. But what that means is that a state cannot pass a law that would render useless or substantially interfere with a contract that already exists. Now, an insurance policy is a contract. That's why we call them insurance contracts. So if a state wanted to, they could impair future contracts, ones you haven't negotiated yet, but they cannot impair significantly or substantially existing contracts, which means, number one, there's no state who's done this, but if they wanted to do it, if they wanted to change the rules going forward, they could. Now, I don't think they will, but if you already have an insurance contract, whatever the rules are in place when you have it, those are the rules that are going to be in place forever. So if you disagree with me, you think that the states might try to change this, then the time is acting now. Lock yourself in. I've got 6 of these, by the way, right now, and I'm likely going to have more because I want to put my money somewhere where I know it's going to be there in the future. It's going to grow. I can experience tax-free growth and a tax-free retirement. I don't want to stick my money somewhere where it'll be subject to the whims of the government. And based on what I know of the law and history, my money is safe and this product is safe. All right. If you have questions about it and you want to know about your specific situation and it's been a while since you smiled, give us a call. We'll do 2 things for you. We will talk you through this. We'll do it for free and we'll put a smile on your face. That's a guarantee. If whoever you talk to doesn't put a smile on your face, then you ask to talk to me and I'll make it right because we take smiling very seriously around here.